There's a light on your face right now. There almost always is. Screen, ceiling bulb, street light bleeding through the curtain. You've never once had to ask the question that ran every single human life for most of our existence. How much light is left? You don't ration light. You've never rationed light. You flick a switch and the sun comes back. Now take it away. Not for a night, not for a power cut. Take it away for half a year, in a place where the sky turns the color of wet slate in autumn and doesn't change again until spring. Where noon looks exactly like midnight, and the only difference between them is that at noon you're supposed to be awake. People lived there, not passed through, lived, raised children, buried their dead, told jokes probably. And the part nobody can properly explain is how they didn't fall apart. Because here's what you have to understand about darkness that long. It isn't peaceful. It's not a cozy winter evening stretched out. Your body treats it as an emergency. Your sleep breaks into pieces. Your appetite goes strange. Your sense of time comes loose and starts drifting, so a week feels like 3 days and a day feels like a week. Modern people who spend a single winter up there describe the same thing over and over. Somewhere around the 6th or 7th week, you stop being sure how long you've been in it. Now do that with no calendar, no clock, no electricity, no promise from anyone that the sun is coming back at all. And here's the part that makes no sense. Nobody made them go. There was warmer land south of them. There was food down there and daylight and rivers that didn't freeze solid. Those people knew it existed because that's where they came from. They walked out of the warm world on purpose, kept walking north, and stopped in a place that should have killed every one of them inside a single winter. So what were they going toward? Put yourself there for a second. It's late autumn, somewhere in the far north of what's now Siberia. You've been watching the sun do something wrong for weeks. Every day it climbs a little less. It stops making it over the hills. Then it stops making it over the low ridge behind the river. Then there's a day where you see a smear of orange along the horizon for maybe an hour, and it sinks, and that's it. That's the last one. Nobody tells you it's the last one. You only find out days later when the smear doesn't come back. The cold that follows isn't the cold you know. You've been cold before, waiting at a bus stop, walking to your car in January. That's discomfort. This is different in kind, not degree. This is cold that takes your hands away from you. 20 minutes outside without covering and your fingers stop obeying. Not hurting, worse than hurting. They just stop answering, and you watch them fail to close around the thing you're holding. And you understand in a very calm and very quiet way that you are now a person who cannot make a knot, light a fire, or hold a spear. That's how it kills you. Not dramatically. It just takes the tools away one at a time, starting with your hands. And the darkness makes every part of that worse. You can't see the weather coming. You can't read the ground under you, so a river you crossed 100 times in summer is now a lid over black water, and you have no way to know how thick that lid is. You can't track. You can't spot the animal watching you. And then there's what it does to the inside of your head. Your body runs on a clock, and that clock is set by light hitting your eyes in the morning. Take the morning away, and the clock doesn't stop. It drifts. You start falling asleep at hours that make no sense, waking at 3 with your heart going, lying there in a black that has no edges to it. People who winter up there now, with heating and electric light and a supply plane, still describe the same slow unraveling. Time turns to soup. You lose track of what day it is, and then you lose track of whether that matters. Now strip out the heating, the light, and the plane. Most people picture prehistoric survival as a fight, something with teeth on one side and a sharpened stick on the other. Up here, it isn't a fight at all. There's nothing to fight. It's just an enormous cold room with the light off, and you're in it, and you have to stay alive in it for months. So what did they actually do? For a long time, everyone assumed they simply didn't. The far north was supposed to be empty until relatively recently, because the whole idea of people surviving up there that early seemed ridiculous. It wasn't a fringe opinion, it was the default. Then, in northern Siberia, along a river called the Yana, scientists found something that shouldn't have been there. A camp, well above the Arctic Circle. roughly 30,000 years old. Sit with that for a second, because it's easy to hear a number like that and let it slide past. 30,000 years ago, in the deep cold, at a latitude where the sun goes out for a long stretch of every winter, there were people living on that river. Not one lost wanderer. A camp, tools, worked ivory, the debris of ordinary life. Somebody sat there and made things with their hands. And they weren't scraping by at the absolute edge of possibility either. The stuff left behind at that site looks like the work of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Confident, practiced. Which raises a much more uncomfortable question than, did anyone live up there? If they were already that good at it 30,000 years ago, how long had they been getting good at it? Here's where the story turns, and it turns on something almost stupidly small. Fire is the obvious answer. Everybody's first guess is fire. And fire matters, we'll get to fire, but fire alone does not solve this problem, and it's worth understanding why. Fire is a point. It warms whatever surface is facing it. Turn around and your front freezes while your back cooks. Fire needs fuel, and up there in the open cold, there are no forests to speak of. Fire can't come with you when you go out to check a trap in a wind that would strip the skin off your face. And you have to go out. Sitting still next to a fire for 6 months is not survival. It's just a slower version of starving. So fire keeps you alive for the hours you're beside it. It does nothing for the hours you aren't. What actually solved the problem is something else entirely, and it's sitting on your body right now. A needle. Specifically, a needle with a hole in it. That sounds like nothing. It's the most boring object in any museum. People walk straight past the case. But an eye in a needle is one of the genuine turning points in the whole human story, and here's why. Without a needle, you can wrap yourself in a hide, draping, tying. It's better than nothing, and it is nowhere near enough, because cold doesn't get in through the middle of the hide. Cold gets in at the gaps, at the wrist, the neck, the ankle, the seam that won't sit flat. A draped skin in a real wind is basically a chimney with a person inside it. A needle with an eye lets you pull a fine thread through a small hole and close those gaps. It lets you build a garment with a shape, sleeves that end at the wrist and grip, a hood that seals around the face, 2 layers, one with the fur turned in against your skin, and one with the fur turned out against the weather, with a thin cushion of trapped air between them doing the actual work. That's the whole trick, not the fur, the trapped air. Same principle as the insulation in your walls. Same principle as the jacket hanging by your door right now, which is doing nothing clever at all except holding still air in place around your body. You are wearing a 30,000-year-old idea, and you've never once thought about it. And we know they had it because the needles turn up, thin, carefully made, with an eye drilled through the end. Some of the oldest ones found anywhere come out of the cold parts of Siberia, which means the thing that let people survive the far north wasn't invented by accident once they got desperate. Somebody was already making them. Then there's the burial site at Sungir in Russia, roughly 34,000 years old, and it does something no needle can do on its own. It shows you the finished clothes. The bodies there were buried covered in thousands of small beads carved out of ivory. Thousands. And the beads weren't in a heap. They were lying in lines and rows, following the shape of a body, because they'd been sewn onto clothing that has long since rotted away. The pattern of the beads is the ghost of the garment. You can see where a sleeve ended, where a cap sat on a head, where something crossed a chest. These weren't people bundled in a skin. These were people in tailored, fitted, close-cut clothing, decorated to an absurd degree, in a world with no sun. And now think about the labor. Every one of those beads had to be carved and drilled by hand. People have tried to work out how long that takes, and the honest answer is a very, very long time. Hours each, thousands of them, which means somebody sat in the dark, by firelight, in a freezing camp, and spent what must have been months of their life making beautiful clothes. You don't do that if you're barely hanging on. You do that if you've won. If you're into this kind of thing, the forgotten stuff about how ancient humans actually lived, hit subscribe, because the next thing they figured out is even stranger, and it's the reason they could see in the dark at all. Warm is one problem. Seeing is another problem entirely, and it's the one people underestimate. Think about what you actually need light for in a place like that. Not comfort, not atmosphere. You need it to make things. Repairing a torn seam in the shoulder of your coat is not optional. It's the difference between living and not, and you cannot do it blind. You cannot sharpen a point blind. You can't check a child for frostbite blind. You can't butcher properly blind, and doing it badly wastes food you cannot replace. 6 months without light isn't just miserable. It's 6 months where you can't maintain any of the equipment keeping you alive. So they made lamps, not torches. Torches burn out, smoke, and drip. A lamp, a shallow dish of stone with a wick sitting in melted animal fat, burning slow and steady and low. There's a specific reason this is brilliant, and it's a reason that only makes sense if you've been paying attention. Wood is scarce up there. Fat is not. Fat is walking around on 4 legs in front of you. Every animal you kill for meat is also carrying your lighting for the next few weeks inside its own body. So the same hunt that feeds you lights your house. 1 resource, 2 problems, no waste. It's an elegant piece of engineering, and it was worked out by people with no metal, no writing, and no way to store an idea except by telling somebody else about it. Stone lamps like this turn up across the Ice Age world, including in the painted caves further south, where they were burning fat to see well enough to make art in total blackness. Same tool, different reason. And I want you to picture it properly, because this is the image that stuck with me while writing this. A low shelter. Outside, a darkness with no bottom to it, going on for weeks. Inside, 1 small yellow flame in a dish of fat, and around it, people. Somebody stitching, somebody drilling a bead, a kid asleep against somebody's leg. That's not survival, that's a room. They built the first indoor world. They took the concept of inside and made it real, because outside had become genuinely uninhabitable. But a room needs walls, and up there are no trees. So what did they build it out of? Before we get to that, one quick thing, because it changes how you read everything else. In that world, you don't die from a disaster. You die from a small mistake made 2 hours earlier. Here's the clearest example. You go out. You're working hard, hauling something, digging a trap out of the snow. You get warm. You start to sweat. That sweat is now inside your clothing. The moment you stop moving, that moisture starts pulling heat out of you at a rate your clothes cannot fight. The trapped air layer that was keeping you alive is now wet, and wet air moves heat away from your body many times faster than dry air does. Your own effort has just disarmed your best piece of technology. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. Not a predator, not a fall, not a storm. You worked too hard in the wrong layer, and now you're a wet person a long way from a fire in the dark. Which is why the northern peoples who came later were obsessive about it, and almost certainly why these people were too. You loosen the hood before you start working. You shed a layer before you're warm, not after. You move at a pace that keeps you just slightly cold on purpose. Being a bit uncomfortable is the correct setting. Comfort is the warning sign. Think about how counterintuitive that is. Every instinct you have says get warm, stay warm. Up there, the rule is the opposite. And the people who couldn't learn to override their own instincts didn't come home. Now, those walls. Bones. Mammoth bones, specifically. And when you first hear that, your brain does something a bit cartoonish with it. A few tusks leaning together. A hut. It wasn't a hut. Across the cold parts of Europe and Russia, scientists found the remains of structures built out of mammoth bone, and the scale of them is hard to sit with. Skulls sunk into the ground as foundations, each one heavier than a fridge. Jaws stacked in overlapping rows like roof tiles, which is exactly what they were doing. Long bones as framing, tusks curved over the top to hold everything down against wind that would tear an ordinary shelter apart. One of these structures is around 40 feet across. The bones of dozens of animals went into it. Now hold on to something, because this is where it gets genuinely strange. A mammoth skull is enormously heavy. Nobody is carrying one any real distance across frozen ground, which means the bones didn't come from a single hunt or a single lucky season. They were gathered, collected. Some almost certainly scavenged from animals that died years apart in different places and hauled in over time. That's not a shelter someone threw up when the weather turned. That's a construction project, planned across seasons, maybe across years, by people who had to agree on where the thing would stand and keep coming back to it. Somebody had to hold the idea of a finished building in their head long before there was a building, and convince everybody else to keep dragging bones toward it. That takes language, real language, with a future tense in it. It takes somebody willing to do work whose payoff arrives next winter, which tells you something the bones themselves don't. These people weren't reacting to the dark. They were planning around it. All right, warm, lit, sheltered. Now you starve. Because here's the trap the far north sets, and it's a nasty one. In summer, the place is unbelievably generous. Herds everywhere, rivers full of fish, birds nesting in numbers you wouldn't believe. It's a better hunting ground than most of the warm world. Then the light goes, and it closes. The herds move, the rivers seal, the birds leave. The plants are gone or under a meter of snow, and there's no gathering, no roots, no berries, nothing green for months. Everything you're going to eat for the next half year either already exists in your camp or is going to have to be hunted out of the darkness. And now the second trap, which is the one that actually kills people. You'd think the answer is eat lots of meat. It isn't. Lean meat on its own, in extreme cold, will kill you, and it kills you while you're eating. Your body can only process so much protein without fat and carbohydrate to go with it. Push past that, and you get weak, sick, and worse off than if you'd eaten nothing at all. Explorers and trappers ran into this the hard way and gave it a few different names, none of them polite. So the thing you're hunting for isn't meat, it's fat. Fat is the currency up there. Fat is heat. Fat is fuel that burns slow. Fat is your lamp. Fat is your waterproofing. Fat is the thing that stops the cold from eating your body from the inside. A skinny animal in midwinter is close to worthless. A fat one is a month of life, which reframes the entire hunt. You're not out there in the dark looking for something to kill. You're out there looking for something with enough fat on it to be worth the risk of leaving the shelter. And in late winter, when every animal in the region is running lean too, that calculation gets very ugly very fast. And picture that hunt honestly for a moment, because it's nothing like the version in your head. There's no dawn. There's no golden light on a plain. There's a gray-blue, almost glow that comes off snow under moon and stars, and that's your entire visual world. You're navigating by shapes you memorized in summer, a ridge, a bend in a frozen river, a boulder you know the silhouette of, which is now the only thing telling you where you are. You have a hard limit, and it's not your courage, it's the fat in your lamp and the food in your stomach. Go too far, and the return trip becomes arithmetic you're going to lose. So you're out in the black, cold, hungry, working from memory, hoping something with a thick layer of fat on it happens to be standing where you think it might be. And back at the shelter, people are waiting to find out whether you come back and whether you're carrying anything. Because if you're not, that's not a bad day. That's a shortfall that has to be taken out of a store that was already going to be tight. Here's a survival problem nobody puts in the documentaries. You are now stuck in a low, smoky, dark shelter with the same dozen or so people for months. No leaving, not really. No privacy in the sense you understand it at all. You sleep pressed against them for warmth. You eat what they eat. You hear every argument, every illness, every grief from a few feet away, and there is nothing to do. That's the part people miss. The hunting is occasional. The rest is time. Enormous quantities of empty, dark, cold time with the same faces for weeks that blur into each other. Groups fall apart under that. It's not a small risk. It's arguably the biggest one, because a group that fractures in midwinter is a group that splits its food, its fuel, and its labor at the exact moment it can't afford to. Nobody survives that alone, not for a night. So think again about those thousands of ivory beads. We call that decoration, and it's easy to file it under art and move on. But look at what it actually does in that room. It gives every pair of hands something to do. It creates skill, which creates status, which gives people a reason to matter to each other. It makes the long, dark hours into something with a shape and a result. And at the end of it, somebody is wearing something spectacular that the whole group made, and everybody can see it, and everybody knows what it cost. That's not decoration. That's social engineering. That's a group inventing a reason to hold together through the worst stretch of the year. The beads weren't a luxury they could afford because they were safe. They might be part of why they stayed safe. And then there's the thing your body needs that has nothing to do with food at all. Sunlight. Your skin makes vitamin D out of sunlight. Without it, over months, bones weaken, muscles go, and the immune system starts letting things through that it would normally stop. Children are hit hardest. A childhood without sun in a world with no medicine should have been a catastrophe repeating itself every single generation up there. It wasn't, and the reason is quietly beautiful. The animals up there had been standing in the summer sun all season, and some of what they'd made from it was stored in their fat and their organs. Fish carried it. Sea mammals carried it. Liver was loaded with it. So when you eat the fat, you're eating stored sunlight. Last summer's daylight held in an animal's body through the whole dark and handed to you in the middle of winter. They had no idea that's what they were doing. Not a clue. But the people who ate that way lived, and the people who didn't. And after enough generations, that stops being luck and starts being culture. The food rules get passed down as rules. Eat this part. Always give this to the children. Nobody remembers why anymore. They were eating the sun secondhand, in the dark, without knowing it. There's one more thing that should have broken this, and it's the one that gets me. Children. A baby in that world is a heat problem with no solution. It can't shiver properly. It has a huge head relative to its body, which is where heat escapes fastest, and almost no ability to hold on to warmth on its own. Leave an infant in that cold, unprotected, for a very short time, and there is no recovering it. Which means every single one of those camps had somebody whose full-time job for 6 months was keeping a small body warm, carrying it inside their own clothing, waking to check it, never being more than a few steps from the fire with it. And older children are their own crisis, because children need to move and there is nowhere to move to. Months indoors, in the dark, in a space you could cross in a few steps. Every parent who's been through a long, rainy week understands about 1% of that, yet they kept having them, kept raising them. At Sungir, 2 of the burials are children, and they're covered in more ivory work than the adult is. Thousands of beads, a spear made from a straightened mammoth tusk, which is a piece of work so difficult that people still argue about how it was even done. Whatever else was going on up there, those kids were not disposable. Somebody spent an unimaginable amount of a very short life making beautiful things for them. So the dark didn't just fail to kill them, it didn't manage to make them hard either. So they've solved warmth, light, shelter, and food. 4 impossible problems. There's one left, and it's the one I can't stop thinking about. How did they know it was coming back? You know the sun returns because you were told. You've got a calendar, a phone, a school lesson from when you were 7, and a whole civilization quietly confirming it every day. You have never had to take the return of the sun on faith. They had none of that. What they had was the memory of people who'd been through it before. And that's the real invention. Not the needle, not the lamp, not the bone house. Somebody, in the first generation of humans who ever walked into a polar winter, had to survive it without knowing it would end, and then tell everyone else. Think about the position that person was in. Every instinct in the body screaming that something has gone permanently wrong with the world. Nothing to check it against. No evidence anywhere that the light is coming back. Just weeks of black, then months, then the growing suspicion that this is simply what the world is now. They held on anyway. And when the smear of orange finally came back over the horizon, that person became something new. A keeper of the information. The one who could say, next autumn, when the sun started climbing lower and everybody's stomach dropped, "I've seen this. It ends. Here's roughly when." Marks turn up on Ice Age bone and antler across this world. Rows of notches, deliberate, spaced, clearly counted rather than decorative. What exactly they were counting is argued about, and honestly, nobody can be certain. But something in those marks is a person keeping track of a cycle they couldn't see the end of, which is about as human as anything ever gets. That's the last piece. Not a tool, a promise, passed down, that the dark is temporary. So here's how ancient humans survived 6 months without seeing the sun. They didn't beat the dark. Nobody beats the dark. What they did was smaller and far cleverer than that. They pulled a small piece of the world inside, sealed it, lit it, and defended it. Fitted clothing to carry a warm layer of air on their own bodies. A lamp burning the fat of the animals they ate. A house built from the bones of the same animals. Food chosen for fat instead of meat, which quietly delivered the sunlight they couldn't get any other way. And a memory, handed down, that the light was coming back. That's not surviving the environment. That's stepping out of it. And it's the single most important thing our species ever learned to do, because it's the reason we're everywhere. Humans aren't the toughest animal on this planet. We're not close. We're the animal that builds a small, warm bubble and carries it into places nothing else can go. Every desert, every mountain, every ocean crossing since, and eventually a metal room in orbit with people inside it, is the same move those people made on a frozen river 30,000 years ago. Take the survivable world with you. And notice what's missing from that list. There's no breakthrough, no single genius. No moment where somebody works it out and everything changes. It's 5 ordinary solutions, each one useless on its own, stacked on top of each other until together they add up to something no animal on Earth had ever managed. The clothing is pointless without the needle. The needle is pointless without somebody with light enough to use it. The lamp is pointless without the fat. The fat is pointless without a shelter to bring it back to. And every part of it is pointless without a group willing to hold together long enough to keep the whole thing running. That's what survival actually looks like, not heroism. A stack of small, correct decisions made by people who were cold and tired and probably sick of each other, repeated every day for 6 months, every year for thousands of years. But that's the part you already half expected. Here's the part you didn't. Something up there never quite left you. Go back to February. Go back to the version of you that leaves in the dark, comes home in the dark, and hasn't had proper sun on their face in weeks. You're tired in a way that sleep doesn't touch. You want heavy food, warm food, food with fat in it. You want to be indoors with the lights on and somebody you like, and you want to do absolutely nothing at all. You've probably been told that's a personal failing. Low energy. Bad habits, winter blues. It isn't. It's a program. It's an old, deep set of instructions running exactly as designed. And it was written by people for whom every one of those urges was a survival behavior. Stay in, get warm, eat fat, stay near the others, wait it out because it ends. You're not broken in the winter. You're being reminded. The dark never really let go of us. It just got kinder about how it holds on.